On the evening of October 12th, 2008, the autumn air in the city of Northgate was crisp and carried the scent of approaching winter. For 24-year-old Eleanor Vance, it was just another Tuesday, the end of a long but satisfying day at an architectural firm where she worked as a promising intern. She was meticulously building a future, one blueprint at a time, a life defined by ambition, kindness, and a quiet determination that impressed everyone she met. But as she walked out of her office building and into the fading light, she unknowingly stepped away from that future forever. What happened in the hours that followed would become a mystery that haunted her family, stumped investigators, and lay dormant for more than a decade. Eleanor Vance was the kind of person who seemed to radiate a gentle competence. She was organized, dependable, and deeply dedicated to her craft, often staying late to perfect a design or assist a senior partner. Her passion was not just a job. It was a calling to create spaces that were both beautiful and functional. A dream she had nurtured since she was a little girl, building elaborate structures with wooden blocks. Beyond her professional life, Eleanor was the steady emotional anchor for her family. She spoke with her younger sister, Chloe, every single day without fail, sharing details of her work, listening to Chloe's university dramas, and offering the kind of unwavering support that only a close sibling can provide. She was saving diligently for a down payment on a small condo, a tangible goal that represented her first major step toward independence. Her life was a portrait of responsibility and forward momentum. On that particular Tuesday, Eleanor had plans to meet a friend for a late dinner after finishing up some project renderings. She sent a final text message at 7:15 post-meridium, confirming she was on her way. It was the last message anyone would ever receive from her. When she failed to arrive at the restaurant, her friend assumed she'd gotten tied up at work, a common occurrence, and went home after waiting for an hour. The next morning, the first real crack in the normal rhythm of life appeared. Eleanor's project manager called her cell phone when she did not arrive for a critical 9 ante-meridium meeting. The call went directly to voicemail. This was highly uncharacteristic. Eleanor was never late, and if she was the first to call and notify the team. A knot of unease began to tighten among her colleagues. Meanwhile, her sister Chloe had also been trying to reach her for their customary morning chat. After her fourth call went to voicemail, a prickle of genuine fear replaced her annoyance. She called their parents, who immediately tried to soothe her, suggesting a dead phone battery or a simple oversight. But Chloe's intuition told her something was terribly wrong. By noon, the unease had blossomed into full-blown panic. Eleanor's parents, after calling every one of her friends and getting no answers, contacted the Northgate Police Department to file a missing person report. The officer on the desk was initially calm, explaining that adults have the right to disappear and that she would likely turn up soon. But the Vances' description of their daughter, her unshakable reliability, her constant communication, was compelling enough to warrant immediate attention. An officer was dispatched to her apartment for a wellness check. The apartment was pristine and undisturbed. Her bed was made, there were no signs of a struggle, and her cat was waiting patiently by its food bowl. The only things missing were Eleanor herself, her purse, and her car keys. Her car, a modest blue sedan, was not in its designated parking spot. The search had officially begun. Music. The first 24 hours of a missing person investigation are the most critical, and the Northgate detectives moved swiftly. An alert was issued for Eleanor's vehicle, and officers began canvassing her neighborhood, speaking with neighbors, and looking for any security camera footage that might show her movements. The city was large, and the potential search area was vast, but her car was the most important lead they had. Late the following day, a patrol officer spotted the blue sedan. It was parked on a quiet, tree-lined residential street several miles from both her apartment and her office, a location that had no obvious connection to her daily routine. The discovery sent a chill through the investigative team. It was found in a place she had no reason to be. The vehicle was immediately secured as a crime scene. Forensic technicians descended upon it, meticulously examining every inch for clues. Inside, they found Alara's purse on the passenger seat, containing her wallet with her credit cards and identification still inside. The car keys were in the ignition, and the doors were unlocked. The only significant item that appeared to be missing was her cell phone. There were no overt signs of violence inside the car. No blood, no torn fabric, no indication of a physical struggle. It was as if the driver had simply parked the car, left the keys, and walked away. This sterile scene was both baffling and deeply unsettling to investigators. It suggested a level of control that was at odds with a random, violent abduction. Detectives began the painstaking work of building a timeline of Alara's last known day. They interviewed her coworkers, who confirmed she had left the office around 7 post Meridian in good spirits. They spoke to the friend she was supposed to meet, who provided the time of her last text message. Every detail painted a picture of a normal evening that had taken an inexplicable turn. The focus naturally shifted to Alara's personal life. Detectives spoke at length with her family, searching for any hint of trouble, any secret struggles, or any new individuals in her life she might not have mentioned. The Vances were adamant that Alara was happy and stable. They described her recent breakup with her boyfriend of 2 years, Mark Renshaw, as amicable, though they admitted she had been sad about it. This information immediately made Mark Renshaw a person of interest. Detectives learned that while the breakup a month prior had been mutual on the surface, Mark had been having a difficult time accepting it. Friends reported that he had called Alara several times in the past week, and one friend recalled Alara mentioning that he had seemed more upset during their last conversation. Detectives brought Mark in for questioning. He was visibly distressed by the news of Alara's disappearance and was cooperative, but his story had inconsistencies. He initially claimed he had been home alone all night, but phone records later showed he had made calls from a sports bar across town. When confronted with this, he admitted he had lied because he did not want to look unconcerned, stating he had gone out for a drink to clear his head. This lie, however small, elevated the investigators' suspicion. In their experience, people who lied about their whereabouts during a critical time window often had something to hide. Mark Renshaw became the primary focus of the early investigation. They requested his phone records, began looking into his background, and treated him as their most viable suspect. As part of their due diligence, investigators also interviewed everyone who had interacted with Alara in the days leading up to her disappearance. This included a brief, almost perfunctory interview with a man named Julian Croft. Croft worked as a junior project manager at a different firm that shared office space in the same building. He knew Alara professionally, and they sometimes shared a coffee break in the building's lobby cafe. Julian presented himself as a concerned acquaintance. He told detectives he had seen Alara leaving the building on the night she vanished and had exchanged a brief, friendly wave with her in the parking garage. He offered his sincere hope for her safe return and provided a solid alibi for his time that evening, which included a dinner receipt from a restaurant and a movie ticket stub. He was polite, composed, and seemingly just another colleague shocked by the news. After a 20-minute conversation, detectives checked his name off the list and moved on, their focus remaining squarely on the ex-boyfriend. Music. For 2 agonizing weeks, the search for Eleanor Vance yielded nothing. Volunteers, organized by her desperate family, scoured local parks and wooded areas. Police followed up on dozens of fruitless tips. The media coverage was intense, with Alara's smiling photograph plastered on news channels and telephone poles across the state. Yet there was no sign of her. The investigation into Mark Renshaw continued, but the case against him was circumstantial at best. While his initial lie was suspicious, his alibi for the rest of the evening began to solidify. Multiple witnesses from the sports bar confirmed he had been there until closing time, and cell tower data corroborated his location. There was no forensic evidence linking him to Alara's car, and a search of his apartment and vehicle turned up nothing. Then, on a gray Saturday morning in late October, the search came to a tragic and definitive end. A hiker venturing off a main trail in the sprawling Meadow Creek State Park, nearly 30 miles outside the city, discovered what appeared to be human remains, partially concealed by fallen leaves and underbrush. He immediately contacted the park rangers, who secured the area and called the state police. The Northgate detectives assigned to Alara's case felt a grim certainty as they drove to the remote location. The area was dense with trees, far from any roads, a place someone would go only if they wanted to ensure something remained hidden. The medical examiner was on the scene, and within hours, a preliminary identification was made using the dental records faxed over from Alara's family dentist. It was her. The Vance family's faint, flickering hope was extinguished in a single, devastating phone call. Their daughter, the bright and gentle architect of her own promising future, had been found. The missing person case was now a homicide investigation. The autopsy revealed that Eleanor Vance had died from a combination of blunt force trauma to the head and asphyxiation. The state of the remains suggested she had been killed on the night she disappeared and left at that location shortly after. The forensic team worked meticulously at the recovery site, but the elements had not been kind. 2 weeks of exposure to rain, wind, and wildlife had degraded much of the potential evidence. They did, however, collect what they could. Trace evidence specialists vacuumed Alara's clothing, which was surprisingly intact. They found soil samples that did not match the immediate area, suggesting she may have been held somewhere else first. They also found a few microscopic synthetic fibers on the cuff of her jacket that seemed out of place. But at the time, in 2008, the technology to analyze such a minuscule sample for deoxyribonucleic acid was not yet reliable. The fibers were carefully bagged and placed into an evidence locker, a tiny, forgotten detail in a sea of overwhelming grief and frustration. With the discovery of the body, the pressure on Mark Renshaw intensified. Detectives questioned him again, this time with the gravity of a murder charge hanging in the air. He was distraught, breaking down several times, but he maintained his innocence. He voluntarily gave a deoxyribonucleic acid sample and allowed another, more thorough search of his home and car. The results came back a week later. His deoxyribonucleic acid was not found on Alara's body or her clothing. The fibers found at the scene did not match anything he owned. His alibi, once shaky, was now confirmed by multiple sources. After weeks of intense scrutiny, Mark Renshaw was officially cleared. The investigation was back at square one, but now they were not looking for a missing person. They were hunting a killer. The months that followed were a slow, grinding crawl toward a dead end. Detectives re-interviewed everyone, chased down every lead, and submitted every piece of evidence for analysis, but nothing broke the case open. Alara's cell phone was never found, its data trail ending abruptly a few miles from her office. The anonymous killer had left behind almost nothing. 2 years after Alara's death, with no new leads and no viable suspects, her case was officially moved to the cold case files. For the Northgate Police Department, it was a painful but necessary administrative step. For the Vance family, it was a sentence of indefinite uncertainty, a life lived in the shadow of unanswered questions. The world moved on, but for them, time had stopped on that crisp October evening in 2008. Music. A decade is a long time. It is long enough for wounds to scar over, for memories to soften at the edges, and for a city to forget the face on a missing poster. By 2019, the case of Eleanor Vance was a dusty file in a crowded records room, a tragic story known only to her still grieving family and the handful of original detectives who had since retired or moved on. That was when Detective Miles Corbin, a veteran investigator with a reputation for tenacity, was assigned to head Northgate's newly formed cold case unit. His mandate was simple: to look at old cases with new eyes and, more importantly, with new technology. He began his work by methodically pulling the files of the city's most vexing unsolved homicides, and Eleanor's case immediately stood out. Detective Corbin was struck by the thoroughness of the original investigation. The first detectives had done everything by the book, but they had been limited by the tools of their time. As he read through the dense pages of forensic reports, one small entry caught his eye. Item 47B, miscellaneous synthetic fibers, dark blue, recovered from victim's left jacket cuff. It was a footnote, a dead end from 2008. But for Corbin, in 2019, it was a glimmer of possibility. He learned that forensic science had made monumental leaps in the intervening years. The development of new extraction techniques and the refinement of touch deoxyribonucleic acid analysis meant that a viable profile could now be obtained from just a few skin cells left on a surface. A sample that had been useless a decade ago might now hold the key to identifying the killer. Corbin put in a request to have item 47B, along with other trace evidence from the case, sent to a specialized private lab known for its work on cold cases. It was a long shot, and the funding was tight, but he convinced his superiors that the Vance case deserved one more look. The carefully preserved evidence bag, sealed for over 10 years, was retrieved from the climate-controlled storage facility and couriered to the laboratory. Weeks turned into months as the lab's technicians performed their delicate work. They used advanced amplification processes to analyze the minuscule fibers. The first few attempts failed to yield a usable sample. Detective Corbin waited, his hope dwindling with each passing week. He knew that this might be the last chance to bring justice to Eleanor Vance. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, he received the call he had been waiting for. A forensic scientist from the lab informed him that they had succeeded. From a single, tiny thread, they had managed to isolate and extract a partial male deoxyribonucleic acid profile. It was not a complete sequence, but it was more than enough to run through the national database. After 11 years of silence, Eleanor's case finally had a voice again. The partial profile was uploaded to the Combined DNA Index System, or CODIS, a vast repository of profiles from convicted offenders and arrestees. The team waited with bated breath. A direct hit would likely solve the case instantly. But when the results came back days later, they were met with disappointment. There was no match. The killer was not in the system. For a moment, it felt like another dead end. But Detective Corbin and his team were not ready to give up. The lab confirmed that while the profile was only partial, it was strong enough for another, more innovative type of search: familial deoxyribonucleic acid analysis. This technique did not look for a perfect match, but for a partial one, searching for close relatives of the unknown contributor who might be in the database. It was controversial and only legal in a handful of states, but theirs was one of them. The search was authorized. This time, they got something. The system flagged a profile belonging to a man in a neighboring state who was serving time for armed robbery. He was not the killer. He had been incarcerated at the time of Eleanor's murder. But the database indicated he shared enough genetic markers to be a close relative, likely a first or second cousin, to the person who left the DNA on Eleanor's jacket. The killer had a family, and now the police had a way to find him. Music. The new lead galvanized the cold case unit. Using the convicted felon as a starting point, forensic genealogists and detectives began the arduous process of building out his family tree. They sifted through public records, birth certificates, and social media, slowly mapping a web of relatives that branched across several states. After weeks of painstaking work, one branch led them back to Northgate. As they traced the lineage, a name emerged that was eerily familiar to Detective Corbin from his review of the case file. It was a name that had been mentioned only once, in a brief interview conducted in the first week of the investigation. The name was Julian Croft, the helpful colleague from the same office building who had provided a solid alibi and was quickly dismissed. The team was stunned. Julian Croft had never been a suspect. He was a peripheral figure, a face in the crowd of concerned acquaintances. He had since become a successful project manager, was married with 2 children, and was a respected member of his community. On the surface, he was the last person anyone would suspect of a brutal murder. But the science pointed directly to his family line. Detective Corbin pulled the original interview report. Croft had claimed to be at a restaurant and a movie on the night of the murder, and he had the receipts to prove it. The original detectives had accepted this at face value. Looking back with over a decade of hindsight, Corbin saw the alibi for what it was. Easily fabricated, anyone could pick up a receipt or a ticket stub. Suddenly, his brief interaction with Alara in the parking garage seemed less like a friendly wave and more like a potential opportunity. The investigation had a new, singular focus: to prove that Julian Croft was the man who had killed Eleanor Vance. To do that, they needed his deoxyribonucleic acid for a direct comparison. Getting a suspect's deoxyribonucleic acid without alerting them is a delicate operation. A judge would not grant a warrant based on a familial link alone. They needed more. So, the team placed Julian Croft under covert surveillance. For several days, officers tracked his every move, from his suburban home to his downtown office, waiting for an opportunity. The break came on a Thursday morning. An undercover officer watched as Croft bought a coffee from a cafe near his office and sat at an outdoor table to take a phone call. After he finished, he tossed the disposable cup into a public trash can and walked away. As soon as he was out of sight, the officer retrieved the cup, carefully placing it in an evidence bag. It was sent directly to the state crime lab with a priority request. The wait for the results was excruciating. The entire case, 12 years of questions and grief, rested on the microscopic saliva cells left on the rim of that coffee cup. 2 days later, the lab supervisor called Detective Corbin directly. The profile from the cup was a perfect match to the partial profile recovered from the fiber on Eleanor Vance's jacket. They had found him. Armed with an ironclad match, detectives arrested Julian Croft at his office. He was completely blindsided, his expression a mixture of confusion and disbelief. His colleagues watched in shock as the quiet, successful family man was led away in handcuffs. In the interrogation room, his composure remained intact. He denied everything, insisting they had made a terrible mistake. But when Detective Corbin laid out the evidence, the familial link, the surveillance, and the definitive deoxyribonucleic acid match from the coffee cup, Croft's facade began to crumble. The confident denials gave way to sullen silence. Over the next several hours, as detectives pressed him with details from the original case file, the truth finally emerged in a torrent of long-suppressed rage and resentment. His motive was as petty as it was monstrous. He had developed an intense, one-sided obsession with Alara. He saw her as the perfect woman, and he had tried to ask her out several times, but she had always politely declined, stating she was not ready to date after her recent breakup. Her gentle rejections fueled his narcissistic pride into a dangerous fury. On the night she died, he saw her walking to her car, and his obsession boiled over. He followed her. When she stopped at a red light, he pulled up alongside her and claimed his own car was having trouble, asking for help. Alara, ever kind, pulled over to the side of the road to assist him. It was a trap. When she once again rebuffed his aggressive advances, he flew into a rage. He attacked her, forcing her into his own vehicle and driving to the remote state park. His confession was cold and detached, devoid of any remorse for the life he had destroyed. The helpful acquaintance had been a predator hiding in plain sight, his concern a calculated performance to deflect suspicion while he watched the investigation focus on an innocent man. Music. The arrest of Julian Croft sent shockwaves through the community. The story of the decade-old murder, solved by a microscopic thread, captured the public's imagination. For the Vance family, the news was a cataclysm of emotions. There was profound relief that their daughter's killer had finally been identified, but it was coupled with a fresh wave of grief as the horrific details of her final moments were brought into the light. The trial of Julian Croft began a year later. The prosecution's case was built on the unassailable foundation of the deoxyribonucleic acid evidence. Forensic experts testified about the incredible advances in science that had made identifying him possible, explaining to the jury how a few skin cells left on a jacket cuff had reached across time to point to the guilty party. The defense team attempted to argue that the evidence was contaminated, or that the familial search was an invasion of privacy, but the scientific proof was overwhelming. When the prosecution played Croft's taped confession, his cold, remorseless voice filled the courtroom, sealing his fate. Alara's family sat in the front row, enduring every gut-wrenching moment with quiet dignity. After a 2-week trial, the jury took less than 3 hours to return a verdict. They found Julian Croft guilty of first-degree murder. At his sentencing, Alara's sister, Chloe, delivered a powerful victim impact statement. She spoke of a future stolen, of holidays and milestones that would forever be incomplete. She described Alara not as a victim, but as a vibrant, brilliant woman whose only mistake was showing kindness to the wrong person. The judge sentenced Julian Croft to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As he was led from the courtroom, he showed no emotion, his face a blank mask. For him, a chapter of deception had closed. For the Vance family, the verdict was not a victory, but a final, somber punctuation mark on a story of unbearable loss. It could not bring Alara back, but it offered a measure of justice and, for the first time in over a decade, a semblance of peace. Eleanor Vance never got to design the building she dreamed of or build the family she had hoped for. Her life was a blueprint left unfinished, a foundation of promise on which nothing more could be built. But the resolution of her case stands as a testament to the persistence of love and the relentless forward march of science. It serves as a solemn reminder that even when hope seems lost and answers seem buried by time, the truth has a way of enduring, waiting for the right moment and the right people to bring it into the light. If you found this case compelling, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell to stay updated on similar true crime investigations. Until next time, stay alert, stay compassionate, and never underestimate the importance of looking out for those around you.